Okay, so first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has given us the benefit of their experience and opinions over the last 24 hours about what to do with our bees. Right, the decision. I've decided to leave them alone. I'm not going to split the hives. I'm not going to remove the queen. I'm not going to create an artificial swarm. I'm going to leave them in peace in their new home. Am I risking a swarm? Possibly. But we've had these bees for 5 weeks, so let's explain this rationale and thinking. When the bees arrived 5 weeks ago, they came in a nuke, which is a polystyrene box with 6 frames. So they were used to that environment. Worker bees typically live for 6 weeks. So we've had them for 5 weeks and they were already established. Therefore, those bees, most of them have gone. The bees that we have now in the hive are our bees, i.e. the eggs have been laid, they've been produced, they've been born in the hive, i.e. they are our bees. They went from a box with 6 frames into a brood box with 11 frames. So the first thing they had to learn was we've actually got more space to go sideways. But they didn't want to go sideways. They stuck within their original spacing. We then put them in an environment on 25 acres of land where the first time they came out, they must have thought, holy shit, look at all of this. There's 25 acres of hazel, beech, birch, sweet chestnut, rowan, elderberry, hawthorn, miles of hawthorn, dogwood, wild rose, before we even start on all of the wildflowers and the grasses, and the gorse bushes. Amazing. And then of course we've got the farmers' fields all around here. So they must have thought, wow, we've died and gone to bee heaven here. So what did they start doing? They collected all the pollen, they collected all the nectar, they took it back into their hive and they started putting it in as stores. So we've got a lovely new queen. She was a year old, she's a year old. She's busy doing what queens do, laying eggs every day. The other bees are out there, they're collecting all the pollen and the nectar and they're laying it down and they're creating, all of a sudden, within the first 5 weeks, honey. So they're sticking the hive together. But they're still working within their very tight, constrained space. So it's no wonder I started seeing what we considered to be congestion and overcrowding. So we were told, switch some of the frames around, get some of the empty frames in and move some of the really full frames, which have got the baby bees, capped brood, they've got the eggs, they've got the larvae, got the pupa, and also now are dripping with honey. Move them slightly to the outsides. In other words, encourage the bees to realize they can work that way. That worked very quickly. My bees are quick learners. Then what happened? Well, they were starting to congest, so they started producing these swarm cells. And swarm cells are where they basically are developing a new queen, because the old queen's going to say, hang on a minute, too busy in here, I'm off, I'm taking some of you with me and leaving the rest in the hive, and you're going to have your own new queen. So let's talk about swarm. That's the one thing as a newbie beekeeper I have had thrown at me constantly. Avoid swarm, avoid swarm, avoid swarm. The problem is nobody has told that to the bees. The bees haven't read the books. The bees aren't watching the YouTube videos. The bees aren't on Facebook, and the bees sure as hell aren't members of the local Beekeepers Association. They should be, but they're not. So why would bees swarm? Well, if I understand it correctly, the main reason is your queen dies. Well, my queens are active, very active. You've got an aging elderly queen who's not performing very well. They're a year old and they're both very active. You have disease in your colony. The bees look tip-top. They're chubby and they're greedy and they are really, really cute. Or you have overcrowding or congestion. Now, we did have overcrowding and congestion, but the bees did it to themselves. So the answer, I was told, was give them more space. Put a second brood box on top. Well, that's all well and good if somebody had told me that. at the point when I bought the hives, but I didn't have a second brood box. I didn't know I might need one, so I had to order them. You ring the main suppliers and they say, hey, do you know what? We're really, really busy at this time of year. And I'm like, yeah, you're a beekeeping supplier, so surely you're geared up to handle this. Nah, take 10 to 14 days to arrive. Well, by this time my swarm could be halfway to Norway. All right, okay, so what can I do? Well, what you could do is you could put a super on top. Now, a super is a smaller version, and it's where bees are encouraged to lay down the honey. But when you put a super on, you also put in between the brood box, which is where all the activity happens, and the super, you put something called a queen excluder, so the queen can't get up there to lay into the honey, because you don't want your honey adulterated by baby brood. So of course I did that. I put the super on, then I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, this isn't helping. My queen is still stuck in this space here, congested with the other bees, and my bees were still wanting to just be in this original area. Anyway, fortunately, I managed to expedite the order, and my new brood boxes arrived. So, put a second brood box on every hive. So instead of the original nuke with 6 frames, my bees had gone into brood boxes with 11 frames, and I'd now given them a second box, so they had 22 frames. Problem is, my bees were used to living in a bungalow. They did not have the concept of escalators or stairs, and they were sure as hell not going upwards. So they continued to congest. Solved that. I switched some of the frames from the bottom box into the top box. So I basically was teaching my bees, or in my head, I was teaching the bees that they could go between the 2 boxes. Yet I was still seeing swarm cells. And I was still being told, you need to split the hive, you're going to have a swarm, there's a danger here, they're over-congesting. Well, hardly slept for a week. I think my bees were just slightly slow learners at that point. I think they just needed the time to realise that they actually did have all this new space. And bear in mind, we're only 5 weeks in, and I'm only still working with my first round, my first iteration of bees that are living for the 6-week period. So when we went in yesterday with the prime intention of finding the queen, taking her out, knowing some bees would follow her, putting her into another, in essence, creating another colony, splitting the hive, leaving the bees there to create their own new queen, which they can do, and in essence have 2 colonies from one. I really wasn't comfortable with that. And 5 weeks in, I know it's not the right thing to do. So I'm leaving the bees where they are. Will the bees swarm? I have no idea. Bees will be bees. Has everybody else's bees swarmed? Well, all the beekeepers that I've had contact with or spoken to, yep, every single one of them has had a swarm. Why? They tell me because it's unprecedented this year. The weather, the amount of pollen, the resources available to the bees, the growth and the propagation. Well, it might be unprecedented to them as beekeepers because they've been doing this for a while, but it's not unprecedented to us. This is our norm. This is our first year, our first experience. So actually, I think by instinct and intuition, we're probably doing everything right. We are checking the hives more regularly. We're not in a habit of weekly checks, 10-day checks. We're doing it every 4 to 5 days. We're in the habit of going up every single day and talking to the bees. We're in the habit of basically being so conscious about what's happening with the bees. Will they swarm? I don't know. But if they do swarm, what's the worst that can happen? 1, I have to learn how to handle a swarm situation. 2, they're going to swarm typically to the nearest tree. They're on 25 acres of our own land surrounded by trees. They're not going to go very far. Keep your fingers crossed.